My name is Sophia Bennett, and I want to share a story I never thought I'd tell. I live in a quiet lakeside town called Willow Ridge, nestled in the calm hills of Vermont, miles away from any big city rush. Life here moves slowly. The streets are lined with maple trees. Small bookshops smell like old stories, and the sound of loons calling over the lake is a nightly lullaby. I'm 31 years old and work as a receptionist at a family-run inn that overlooks the water. My days are predictable, filled with familiar faces, warm tea, and sunsets that always seem to come right on time. Some might call it uneventful, even dull, but I found comfort in the rhythm. A few close friends, a cozy studio apartment above a bakery, and a life that felt safe. After enduring a series of painful relationships, I'd made peace with solitude. Love. I'd closed that door long ago. I wasn't searching, not even hoping. But love has a strange way of slipping through the cracks, doesn't it? It doesn't knock. It walks in quietly, when you least expect it, sometimes disguised as a stranger asking for a room. That stranger was Caleb Walker. Caleb Walker arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon, just as a soft rain began to tap gently against the windows of the Willow Ridge Inn. He wasn't like the usual tourists who passed through, snapping photos of the lake and asking for directions to the nearest trail. No, Caleb had a quiet presence, one that made the air around him feel a little softer. He wore a dark coat, carried only one leather bag, and looked like he hadn't slept much in days. When he stepped up to the front desk, I greeted him with my usual polite smile. He returned it, but his eyes lingered on mine for just a second longer than I expected. Not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that made me feel noticed. "I'll be in town for a short while," he said, his voice low and steady. "Business trip." I handed him the room key and gave him a rundown of the inn's simple amenities. Before he turned to leave, he said, "Thank you, Sophia." The way he said my name caught me off guard. It felt personal, almost familiar. The next morning, he came down early, asking where he could find a good coffee nearby. I told him about a lakeside cafe that roasted their own beans and suggested a quiet trail behind the inn, where the fog hung like a painting in the early hours. He listened, really listened, not just nodding but holding onto my words like they mattered. And when he returned that evening, he stopped by the front desk again. "You were right," he said. "The coffee was great, and the trail peaceful." That became our routine. Every evening after his meetings, Caleb would stop by. Sometimes we'd talk for just a few minutes. Other nights, we'd end up in the inn's reading room, talking for an hour or more. We spoke about books, about favorite childhood memories, about music that reminded us of simpler days. He told me about the stress of his job in Boston, the weight he carried in his chest that never seemed to lift. And I, for the first time in a long while, opened up. I told him how my world was quiet, but not always fulfilling. How I'd grown, used to being alone not because I wanted to, but because I thought it was safer that way. One night, we walked down to the lake after dark. The moon shimmered across the water, and a breeze danced through the pine trees. We stood silently for a moment, watching the ripples stretch into the distance. Then Caleb turned to me and said, "Being here with you, it feels like I can finally breathe." That was the moment everything shifted. I didn't know what it meant or where it would lead, but something inside me stirred. Hope, something I hadn't felt in years, began to rise quietly in my chest. It was a Thursday evening, the sky painted in soft pinks and grays as the sun dipped behind the hills. Caleb had invited me to dinner at the small cottage he'd rented near the harbor. It was modest, a weathered porch, creaky floors, and the smell of cedar in the walls, but it felt warm inside. We cooked together, laughing over a sauce that refused to thicken and dancing between the stove and the record player, spinning old jazz tunes. For a few precious hours, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of us. We sat on the couch afterward, each holding a mug of tea, the silence between us no longer awkward, but soothing. That's when his expression changed. It grew quiet, too quiet. His fingers tightened around the mug. His eyes suddenly clouded with something heavy. "I need to tell you something," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned to him, instantly alert. "What is it?" He stared at the floor, then lifted his eyes to meet mine. "I'm married." The words hit like a stone in still water. My chest tightened. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. I just sat there, frozen, waiting for him to say it was a joke. But he didn't. "I have 2 kids," he added. My heartbeat rang in my ears. I set the mug down slowly, my hands shaking. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. The words sharp, brittle. "I didn't plan this," he said quickly. "I didn't expect to meet someone like you. My marriage, it's been over for a long time. We're just existing in the same house. I stay for the children. That's all." I stood up, needing space, air, anything to ground myself. I walked outside onto the porch, the cold air biting at my skin. I could hear the lake, the gentle lapping of water against the shore, a sound that usually brought me peace, but now only echoed the chaos in my chest. He followed, but kept his distance. "I understand if you don't want to see me again," he said quietly. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. My mind was spiraling, trying to reconcile the man who made me feel so safe with the man who had hidden something so big. I felt foolish, blindsided, betrayed. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. The kindness in his eyes, the way he remembered small details about me, the way he made me laugh. Was it all real, or was I just the latest escape from his unhappy life? He messaged me the next morning, "I'm sorry, but I miss you." I didn't reply. I couldn't. My heart ached, but my trust had been shattered. And yet, somewhere, deep down, I still longed for him. I hated that. The days that followed felt like I was walking through fog. I went to work, smiled at guests, and folded laundry at the inn. But I wasn't really there. My mind was somewhere else, still on that porch, still hearing Caleb's voice as he said, "I'm married." Every morning, I'd check my phone, hoping not to see his name, and every time I did, my chest would tighten. He kept reaching out, gently. No pressure, just presence. I miss you. I think about you. I can't forget you. Part of me wanted to block his number, to erase the thought of him entirely. But another part, the aching, lonely part, held on. 1 week later, I agreed to see him. We met near the lake, the same place where he once said being with me felt like breathing. This time, I didn't feel light. He felt guarded. I told him I was hurt, that I felt tricked, that I wasn't some secret to be hidden in the shadows. He didn't argue. He simply said, I understand, but I care about you. And then, somehow, I stayed. I told myself I was in control, that I could handle this, that maybe, just maybe, his marriage really was falling apart, and I had walked in at the wrong time. I convinced myself that what we had was rare, that love doesn't always come in perfect packaging, that I was different. But the truth was, I wasn't different. I was the other woman. And no matter how kind Caleb was, or how sincere his words seemed, I was living in a role I never wanted. Our moments together became an escape, a pocket of time where everything felt normal. We cooked dinner, listened to music, shared quiet laughter, but it always ended the same way, with him leaving and me staying behind. He never stayed the night, never brought clothes, never talked about a future. I kept telling myself, he just needs time. He'll leave eventually. He'll choose me. But reality has a way of wearing down even the strongest lies we tell ourselves. My world grew smaller. I stopped going out, declined invitations from friends, rearranged my schedule to match his visits. My life became a string of waiting for a text, a weekend, a sliver of his attention. I stopped journaling, stopped reading. Even the lake, which had always brought me peace, began to feel like a silent witness to a truth I didn't want to face. Some nights, I'd stand by the water and whisper to myself, is this really love, or am I just afraid to be alone again? But I already knew the answer. The girl I once was the one who laughed easily, who read poetry on her lunch break, who believed in soft, honest love, was fading. I had traded pieces of myself for borrowed moments. And while I told myself I was choosing love, what I was really choosing was to be chosen halfway. One evening, after Caleb had left again, I sat in my apartment, staring at a candle flickering on my windowsill. The scent of lavender filled the room, but it did nothing to calm me. I was hollow, empty, in a way I hadn't felt in years. I walked to the mirror and stared at my reflection. My eyes looked tired, my skin dull. I touched my face gently, as if trying to remember the girl who once stood there so full of quiet hope. And then, almost without thinking, I whispered, "What am I doing?" That night, I wrote in a notebook I hadn't touched in months. Page after page poured out grief, longing, guilt, shame, but also truth. I admitted I had lost myself in someone else's story. I had become a chapter in a book that wasn't mine, and that realization hurt, but it also set something free. The next morning, I got up early and walked to the lake. The wind was cool, the water calm. I didn't check my phone. I just stood there, letting the breeze kiss my face. For the first time in a long time, I didn't think about Caleb. I thought about me. Over the next few days, I started saying yes again to coffee with Grace, to walks with my neighbor's dog, to moments I had once said no to in favor of waiting. I lit candles for myself, not for ambiance. I read books without waiting for a text. I smiled, not for anyone else, but because the heaviness had lifted, even just a little. One weekend, Grace invited me to a writing class at the local community center. I hesitated, then nodded. Why not? It was just a small thing, but it felt like planting a seed. The first class was quiet, filled with strangers. But when the instructor gave us 10 minutes to write about a place you feel at peace, I wrote about the lake. Not about Caleb, just the lake, its stillness, its grace, its honesty. As I read my piece aloud, I heard my voice tremble, but I didn't stop. When I finished, the room was silent, then filled with soft, supportive claps. One man across the room gave me a small smile. I smiled back without even realizing it. His name was Benjamin Carter, and he introduced himself during the break. We talked about favorite authors, about why he joined the class, and about the little cafe down the street. He didn't ask personal questions. He didn't try too hard. He just listened. And it felt easy. We started chatting after class every week. Sometimes we walked together to the cafe. Sometimes we didn't say much at all. But there was no pressure, no shadow hanging over our heads. I wasn't falling in love, not yet, but I was beginning to feel something far more important, free. And that, for the first time in a long while, felt like the greatest opportunity of all. Weeks turned into months, and with each one, I felt a little more like myself. Not the version of me that waited by the phone or carefully curated joy around borrowed time, but the real me, the girl who once woke up early just to hear the birds, the woman who found magic in quiet pages, in long walks, in genuine conversation. Benjamin never tried to save me. That was the most beautiful thing about him. He simply showed up, consistently, respectfully, and with quiet patience. We'd meet after writing class, sit on the porch of the cafe with hot drinks in hand, and talk about the ordinary books, rain, the sound of wind between trees. He never asked about my past, unless I brought it up. And when I did, he listened without judgment. One evening, as we sat near the lake, I told him about Caleb. Not every detail, but enough. Enough to explain why I had built walls so carefully around my heart. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He just nodded slowly and said, "You didn't deserve to be someone's second. You deserve someone who chooses you fully." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I didn't reply, but his words rooted themselves deep inside me. The small things started changing. I no longer checked my phone obsessively. I no longer rearranged my schedule for someone else's half-available love. I started saying yes to dinners, walks, and spontaneous plans. I picked up old books I had left, unfinished. I wrote stories again, not about heartbreak, but about hope. I laughed more. Real laughter. The kind that comes from your chest and surprises even you. The inn where I worked felt different too. I welcomed guests with a new sense of ease. I added little touches to the lobby seasonal flowers, quotes by the door, soft music during check-in. I wasn't just working, I was living there again. One day, Grace pulled me aside after lunch. "You're glowing," she said. "You seem lighter." I smiled. "I think I'm finally breathing again." I still thought about Caleb sometimes. I think I always would. But the ache had softened. What used to be sharp and unbearable was now just a quiet memory, a chapter closed. I no longer fantasized about what could have been. I stopped hoping for a message. I stopped wondering if he missed me, because I had stopped missing myself. Benjamin once told me, "Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering who you are beneath the pain." And those words stayed with me like a lantern through the fog. I wasn't in love again. Not completely. But I had fallen back in love with my own company, with my space, with the rhythm of my life, and in doing so, I had opened a door, not to someone else, but to the woman I had always wanted to be. It was late spring when I realized something had shifted for good. I stood on the edge of the lake, the wind brushing gently against my cheeks, sunlight glittering across the water. The season had changed, and so had I. I wasn't waiting anymore. There were no more late-night tears, no more phantom vibrations on my phone, no more silent wishes that Caleb would finally choose me. That longing had faded, not because the love wasn't real, but because I had outgrown the version of myself who accepted less than she deserved. One Sunday, Benjamin and I walked through the Willow Ridge Farmers Market. He held a canvas bag filled with fresh fruit and coffee beans, while I carried a bouquet of lilacs. We laughed at a stand selling handmade candles with terrible pun names. And when I caught him looking at me, really looking at me, I didn't feel nervous. He felt seen, not for what I could be in someone else's life, but for exactly who I was in mine. There was no grand confession, no dramatic kiss in the rain, just quiet presence. He chose me in small ways, walking beside me, learning what kind of tea I liked, asking about my writing. There were no secrets, no shame, no hiding, and that simplicity became my sanctuary. I once thought love had to be dramatic to be real, that it had to hurt, stretch, ache. But I was wrong. Love is kind. Love is consistent. Love, real love, never asks you to dim your light or stay in the shadows. I had spent so long thinking I had to earn love by waiting, by sacrificing, by hoping someone would finally see me as worthy. But the truth was, I had always been enough. I just hadn't believed it. Caleb never reached out again. And maybe that was for the best. We had lived our moment, and it had taught me more than I could have imagined, not just about love, but about boundaries, self-worth, and the quiet strength it takes to walk away. One afternoon, as Benjamin and I sat beneath a willow tree near the lake, I told him, "I'm not the same woman I was 6 months ago." He turned to me and said gently, "I know. I see you now, and I like who you are." It wasn't a declaration. It was a recognition. I smiled and whispered, "So do I." Looking back, I don't regret the heartbreak. I don't wish to erase it. That chapter shaped me, cracked me open, and let light pour in. It reminded me that healing isn't linear. and that growth often comes disguised as loss. I found myself through pain, and from that place, I found something else, to peace. And now, every time I walk by the lake, I no longer search the shoreline for someone who left. I just breathe. I live. And I know, finally, that I am home within myself, and beside someone who walks in the daylight with me, hand in hand. 2. Life lesson. 200 words. Sometimes, love teaches us, not through joy, but through heartbreak. Sophia's story reminds us that being loved isn't enough if you're not being chosen. True love doesn't hide. It doesn't ask you to wait endlessly in silence. It shows up, it speaks honestly, and it walks beside you in the light. The love you accept is a reflection of the love you believe you deserve, and healing begins the moment you realize your worth is not defined by someone else's ability to choose you. Sophia's transformation wasn't about finding another person. It was about rediscovering herself. In the stillness of her small town, in the quiet pages of her journal, and in the slow return of laughter, she rebuilt a life that no longer revolved around someone else's absence. Her story is a tribute to every person who's ever felt like second best, because in the end, the most powerful love is the one we give ourselves. Real life application. 150 words. If you find yourself constantly waiting for a message, for validation, for someone to finally choose you, it might be time to turn inward. Ask yourself, would I want this kind of love for someone I care about? If not, why? Accept it for yourself. Start by creating space for your own voice. Reconnect with your interests, your community, your purpose. Take a class, start a new hobby, or write down your feelings. Little by little, you'll see that healing doesn't always require grand gestures. It begins in quiet decisions to choose peace over chaos. And when real love comes, it won't ask you to sacrifice your identity. It'll honor it. Like Sophia, you deserve someone who walks with you in truth, not hides with you in shadows.